Jeff Snook is with us. He is a writer. And in fact, I actually want to ask a question about I'm a huge history buff, so he's writing a book on World War II. But in addition to that, he has covered college, NFL during his career, now is a full-time writer. And Jeff, you've been writing a lot of interesting things about this Big Ten mess. And as we went to break, I teased that I wanted to ask you specifically about what Ohio State tried to make happen. Based on your conversations, how angry are the people associated with Ohio State athletics with the decisions made by the Big Ten?
Well, as angry as you can imagine any conference school would be, even more so. I mean, if you put this into perspective, no group of players across the 14 schools were more disappointed, angry, and bitter than Ohio State's locker room was. No head coach was more just completely depressed and bitter than Ryan Day was, and with good reason. They had a team returning that would have been the favorite to win the national title along with Clemson. They had their quarterback back. They have so many draft-eligible players from they're going to go into the draft next year back. And not only that, it's the way they worked from that day they left that Fiesta Bowl loss to Clemson, motivated. If you pay attention to the national champions in the last 30 years, many of them were coming off a heartbreaking loss with a lot of players returning and motivated. You don't see a lot of teams repeat, Alabama aside, in recent years because of the motivation factor. And they were as motivated as any team. You remember that game, they were up 16-0, kicking a bunch of field goals. They should have been up about 24 or 27-0, and they got several bad calls. In total objectivity, they got several, and I was on the sideline for most of it, terrible calls in that game. And, talk about a lack of transparency with the SEC crew that called that game. But anyway, I don't want to digress. But that was a heartbroken program a week ago. It still is. And, the athletic director knows that. I mean, he knew it from day one. He was heartbroken as well, Gene Smith. And just a piece of information here, that decision was handed down on Tuesday. The first thing he did on Wednesday was call Kevin Warren and try to find a path for Ohio State to play somehow or some way, and was quickly shot down. Somebody told me that was a very unpleasant conversation. I don't have backup sources to know if it was or wasn't, but Gene Smith wanted to make it appear like he was a good little soldier and go along with that, and released a statement to the media later that day that they would not be pursuing fall football, especially in another conference. Would you see message boards that they might do that? They were never going to do that, in my opinion. The Big Ten is still a perfect fit for Ohio State, given the geography, the financial implications, the academics. It's perfect for the Big Ten, and so is Michigan. And I don't see either one of them ever leaving, no matter what the offers would be somewhere else, no matter how much they've botched this decision. That's not going to happen. Right? So he went to work, I was told, immediately in putting together a consortium, if you will, they needed 6 teams to play. They needed 6 of the powerful teams. And I was told that they had Iowa, Penn State, and Nebraska on board. They were trying to flip Wisconsin and Michigan and couldn't get it done for the factors we cited earlier. And it's, from what I understand, it's a dead issue now. And when I reported that Tuesday night, it might have been dead at that point, but it had taken place the previous 5 to 6 days. And I'm surmising from what I'm hearing now that either on Monday or Tuesday it was shot down and hit a brick wall, and yet my report was Tuesday night. So my facts in that were correct, that it had been taking place. But when Gene had plausible deniability yesterday, when he came out and he texted several media outlets, when they would ask him, is this true? And he would say, no truth to it. That's probably accurate today, and it's probably accurate yesterday. There's no truth to it now, but there was.
And for people out there who didn't see this, by the way, the idea was that Ohio State, Iowa, Nebraska, Penn State, Michigan, and Wisconsin would play a home-and-home outside of a traditional Big Ten season, that everybody would have 5 opponents. They would play a home-and-home, and they would that way be able to play 10 games during the fall.
Right. And just so you know, last night John Bacon the writer who has Michigan contacts, tweeted just as much that he was hearing the same thing. So he's got sources up there on the Michigan side that were telling him the exact same thing about this plan. He had a tweet about midnight. He replied to somebody. He said, my sources are telling me this was
something that was being worked on as well.
Yeah, but he didn't think it was going to come to fruition, I believe is how he stated it, something like that. And he was
and you think, sorry to cut you off, but you think the governor of Michigan, who we have invited on this show, and not surprisingly, she hasn't responded, for some reason, obviously you mentioned earlier the University of Michigan president was opposed to it, but you believe the athletic director and at Michigan, as well as Jim Harbaugh, certainly would be in favor of playing, but that is the obstacle, the university president in conjunction with the governor of the state.
Well, I think they're both in lockstep. So I think the athletic director, Ward Manuel, and the governor totally agree on it. So I'm not saying she was the roadblock per se. If the president already had that belief, he doesn't need to refer to the governor.
Yeah.
I just think her feelings on she does not want high school or college football played in that state this fall. Yet the Lions are going to play. Because, the NFL, you can't, I think it's a little bit out of her jurisdiction, as popular as she is right now. So, but I just believe that president, being a doctor and scientist, and I've read his quotes of what he said, they're in total agreement. So it might not even got to her office. It just didn't help that she had that stance.
Yeah.
If she had been a Republican and a proponent of playing football, then they would have had an issue. And that's what we have in Ohio. Ohio is a Republican governor, and again, I'm not getting into politics, but he tweeted and he approved high school football and all fall sports just 2 days ago. So, if you think about this, in the state of Ohio, you got the President of the United States, the governor of Ohio, the athletic director, the head football coach, the fan base, the parents, and all the players want to play, but yet they're not playing because
it's crazy.
The guy they hired from Minnesota Vikings 5 months ago says they can't. So, and his kid happens to be playing at Mississippi State. So when you put that set of facts together, you tell me how that makes sense.
Oh, I think that, and not only that, Cincinnati Bearcats are playing right now in the state of Ohio.
Exactly.
In addition, obviously, to the Browns and the Bengals and all the high school teams that are playing. So that brings me to the final question that I want to ask you. And you've been fantastic, by the way. Jeff Snook, go check out his books. This scenario in general. Let's say that the SEC, the ACC, and the Big 12 play, and they finish the season. Does Kevin Warren lose his job? Should he lose his job?
How in the world could he keep it? Can you imagine the fallout of that? And I'm talking alumni, fan, donors. I hear right now that 7- and 8-figure donors at the University of Michigan are threatening to withhold their money over this issue. And, the donors in college football basically have a lot of power. So do the board of trustees of all these universities. The presidents are the figureheads, and they work for these people. So can you imagine the fallout, the media fallout, the public fallout, if the ACC, Big 12, and SEC, and I'm rooting for them to do it. I hope they pull it off just for the simple fact you got 85 scholarship kids at all those programs that are trying to do this. And I hate to see it yanked away from one kid, let alone the numbers we're talking about. I hope they succeed and do it just to further illustrate how backwards this conference is in their thinking process. And there's no way he'd keep his job. Let's see if he keeps his job as it is. What's sad is these Big Ten people up here, including him right now, and all the presidents of athletic groups, I'm sure, they're sitting up here just rooting for cases and hoping and praying for cases. And it sounds terrible to say, it's callous. They don't want anybody to die, let's put it that way. But if there's an outbreak on one of these college football campuses, they're not exactly frowning. They don't want to be on an island that this didn't work. And let's not even count the Pac-12 because they have their own issues that don't relate to COVID. But they don't want these other three conferences to succeed, and that's sad that they're going to be sitting up here rooting because they want to be the front runner. They want to look like the geniuses that canceled ahead of everybody else, expecting the other four conferences to follow them, and it didn't happen. So now they're on an island not knowing what to do. If they restart and it would have to shut down by more positive tests, then they would look terrible too. But that's not their greatest fear. Their greatest fear is to have these other three conferences succeed and play a season. They're petrified that's going to happen.
Jeff, this has been phenomenal.